In the final collapsing days of World War II, as the Third Reich crumbled under the relentless advance of Allied forces, one of the most surreal and unbelievable battles in modern history unfolded in the Austrian Alps. By May 1945, Adolf Hitler was dead, Berlin was surrounded, and Nazi Germany was breathing its last breath. Yet far from the major fronts, high on a hill overlooking the quiet village of Itter, stood a medieval fortress that would soon become the stage for a moment so strange that it sounds like fiction. Castle Itter, once a symbol of medieval power, had been transformed by the Nazis into a high-security prison, holding some of France's most important political figures, former prime ministers, generals, and resistance leaders. These men were not ordinary prisoners. They were valuable hostages, bargaining chips for a regime that was already dying. As Nazi command structures collapsed, the SS guarding Castle Itter abandoned their posts, leaving the French prisoners alone, surrounded by chaos and uncertainty. Outside the castle walls, remnants of fanatical SS units were still roaming the countryside, refusing to surrender and hunting for enemies, real or imagined. The prisoners knew that if the SS returned, mercy would not be an option. With no guards and no protection, they faced a terrifying reality. Liberation was close, but death could arrive first. Desperate, they made a decision that would change history. They sent messengers into the surrounding villages, seeking help from anyone willing to listen, even former enemies. What happened next defied every rule of war. A German Wehrmacht officer, Major Josef Sepp Gangl, had already turned against the Nazi regime, determined to protect Austrian civilians from pointless destruction. When he learned about the prisoners at Castle Itter, he made a choice that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Instead of fighting the Allies, he contacted them. Soon after, a small unit of American soldiers from the 12th Armored Division, led by Captain John C. Lee Jr., found themselves preparing to fight alongside German troops, not against them. Former enemies now stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a single goal: stop the SS and save the prisoners. On May 5, 1945, the battle began. Outnumbered, low on ammunition, and defending a medieval castle against a determined SS assault, the Americans, Germans, and French prisoners themselves took up arms. Machine gun fire echoed through the Alpine Valley as SS troops advanced, determined to reclaim the castle and execute its occupants. The defenders fought from towers, windows, and stone walls, using every advantage the ancient fortress could offer. At one point, Captain Lee personally manned a machine gun in an exposed position, fully aware that a single sniper's bullet could end his life. Inside the castle, former French leaders, men who once commanded nations, now loaded rifles and fired back at the SS, fighting not for politics but for survival. As the battle reached its most desperate moment, ammunition nearly gone, and SS forces pressing closer, help finally arrived. American reinforcements broke through, forcing the SS attackers to retreat and surrender. Castle Itter was saved. The prisoners were liberated, but the victory came at a cost. Major Josef Gangl was killed by an SS sniper while attempting to protect one of the French prisoners, becoming a hero remembered not as a German soldier of the Reich, but as a man who chose humanity over ideology. The Battle of Castle Itter remains the only known battle in World War II where American and German soldiers fought side by side against the SS. It was a moment where the lines between enemy and ally blurred, where the war's brutal logic collapsed under the weight of moral choice. In the final hours of the deadliest conflict in human history, Castle Itter proved that even in a war defined by hatred, fear, and destruction, there were moments when former enemies chose to fight together, not for victory, not for flags, but simply to do what was right. To fully understand how extraordinary the Battle of Castle Itter truly was, it is necessary to step back and examine the men trapped inside its walls. These were not ordinary prisoners of war. Among them were former French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier, Generals Maurice Gamelin and Maxime Weygand, tennis champion Jean Borotra, and several high-ranking resistance figures. Each man represented a symbol of defiance against Nazi domination, and their survival carried immense political and psychological value. For years, they had lived under strict surveillance, isolated from the world, knowing that their lives depended entirely on the survival of the regime that held them captive. Ironically, as Nazi Germany collapsed, their danger increased rather than diminished. Outside the castle, Austria had descended into lawlessness. Nazi authority had fractured into isolated pockets of fanatics, particularly SS units who viewed surrender as betrayal and defeat as unacceptable. These men were no longer fighting for victory, but for ideology, revenge, and fear. Rumors spread quickly that SS forces intended to retake Castle Itter and execute the prisoners before Allied forces could reach them. In the fog of war, where communication lines were broken and command structures non-existent, such actions were not only possible, they were likely. For the prisoners, waiting passively meant certain death. Major Josef Sepp Gangl represented a different Germany, one that history rarely highlights. A career officer in the Wehrmacht, Gangl had grown disillusioned with Hitler's regime and horrified by the destruction it brought upon civilians. As the war reached its end, he openly defied SS orders and focused instead on protecting Austrian towns from senseless fighting. His decision to cooperate with American forces was not driven by strategy, but by conscience. He understood that the war was lost, but believed that how it ended still mattered. Captain John C. Lee Jr. and his small American unit were equally unprepared for what lay ahead. Tasked with advancing through enemy territory during the chaotic final days of the war, they suddenly found themselves part of a mission that defied all military doctrine. Fighting alongside German soldiers, trusting men who only days earlier would have been enemies, required an extraordinary level of judgment and courage. There were no guarantees, no reinforcements promised, and no clear command above them. Yet Lee made the decision to proceed, fully aware that history would judge the outcome. As night fell over Castle Itter, the defenders prepared for the inevitable assault. Ammunition was distributed carefully, firing positions were chosen, and every man, American, German, and French, understood that there would be no retreat. The castle's medieval walls, built centuries earlier to withstand swords and siege engines, now faced machine guns, rifles, and grenades. What once symbolized feudal power had become the last refuge against modern fanaticism. When the SS attack began, it was swift and brutal. Gunfire shattered the alpine silence as bullets slammed into stone walls and shattered windows. The attackers moved with ruthless efficiency, probing defenses, searching for weak points, and attempting to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Inside the castle, chaos reigned. Smoke-filled corridors, dust fell from ancient ceilings, and wounded men were dragged to cover as the battle intensified. Yet despite the fear, the defenders held their ground. One of the most remarkable aspects of the battle was the transformation of the French prisoners themselves. Men who had once governed nations and commanded armies now found themselves fighting as ordinary soldiers. Jean Barotra, famous not for warfare but for tennis, volunteered to slip through enemy lines to seek Allied reinforcements. His successful escape became a turning point in the battle, demonstrating that courage in war often comes from the most unexpected places. Captain Lee's exposed machine gun position became a symbol of the battle's desperation. With SS forces closing in, he chose to remain visible, drawing fire away from others and maintaining pressure on the attackers. Every second he survived was a defiance of probability. Every burst of gunfire bought time the defenders desperately needed. As dawn approached, ammunition dwindled and exhaustion set in. The SS assault intensified, sensing that the defenders were nearing their limit. It was at this critical moment that tragedy struck. Major Gangl was killed by a sniper's bullet while attempting to shield a French prisoner from enemy fire. His death resonated deeply with everyone present. In that instant, the battle ceased to be about survival alone. It became about honor, sacrifice, and the rejection of blind loyalty to evil. When American reinforcements finally arrived, the outcome was swift. SS forces, realizing they were outmatched, surrendered or fled. The silence that,